I never believed in ghosts until I started my graveyard shift at a remote train station. There, I discovered a terrifying, unspoken rule. Whatever you do, never acknowledge the phantom conductor on Platform 3. Break that rule, and you're not just watching the trains go by. You're playing a deadly game against an unseen entity that wants you to become a permanent part of the tracks. The Riverside Junction station sat like a forgotten tombstone on the outskirts of Cincinnati, a relic from an era when these rails actually mattered. When I took the job as the overnight attendant, I told myself it was temporary, just a few months to save up enough money to get back on my feet after the divorce. The pay was surprisingly good for what seemed like glorified security work, and the job posting had emphasized one simple requirement: show up, make your rounds, and keep the station minimally operational for the occasional freight transfer that came through twice a week. Nobody mentioned that I'd be completely alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week. My first night started ordinarily enough. Jerome, the evening shift supervisor, was a weathered man in his 60s with the kind of face that had seen too many Ohio winters. He walked me through the basics with an efficiency that suggested he wanted to leave as quickly as possible. The main office sat in the central building, a cramped room filled with outdated monitoring equipment and a space heater that rattled like it was choking on its own dust. 4 platforms extended from the main structure, numbered 1 through 4, though Jerome mentioned that only platforms 1 and 2 saw any real use anymore. "What about 3 and 4?" I asked, glancing at the clipboard he'd handed me with the patrol route outlined in faded blue ink. Jerome paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face, concern or maybe warning, but it vanished so quickly I convinced myself I had imagined it. "3's been closed for renovations for years. Budget never came through. 4's just storage now. You'll do a walkthrough of 1 and 2 every hour, check the main hall every 30 minutes, and keep the lights on. That's it." "Sounds simple enough," I replied, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "Yeah, just stick to your route, Daniel. Don't overthink things. And if you hear anything weird, it's just the building settling. These old stations make all kinds of noise." The way he said it, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me, should have been my first warning. After Jerome left, the silence descended like a physical weight. The main hall of Riverside Junction stretched out before me, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings that swallowed the harsh fluorescent light. During the day, I imagined the acoustics here would carry every footstep and conversation into an echoing cacophony. At night, my breathing seemed obscenely loud. The wooden benches that lined the walls bore the scars of decades of use, their surfaces worn smooth by countless waiting passengers who no longer came. Faded murals depicting Ohio's industrial heritage decorated the upper walls, their colors muted by time and neglect. I decided to familiarize myself with the layout before my first official patrol. The main hall connected to the 4 platforms through a series of covered walkways. Platforms 1 and 2 were relatively well maintained, their safety lines freshly painted in yellow, their overhead lights buzzing with consistent electricity. Platform 4 was exactly as Jerome described, filled with stacked chairs, old signage, and equipment covered in canvas tarps that gave everything the appearance of sleeping giants. Platform 3 was different. The walkway leading to it was narrower than the others, and somewhere along its length the lighting had failed. My flashlight beamed cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint and walls that seemed to close in the further I walked. The air felt different here, colder and somehow thicker, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded me of old pennies. Unlike the other platforms, 3 retained more of its original character. Vintage light fixtures hung from ornate iron brackets, though most of their bulbs were dead or dying. An old wooden bench sat against the far wall, and a clock frozen at 3:47 was mounted above a boarded-up ticket window. I made a mental note to ask about getting better lighting for this area and headed back to the main office. According to my instructions, my first patrol wasn't due until midnight, which gave me 20 minutes to settle in. I made coffee in the ancient pot that Jerome had shown me, grimacing at the bitter taste but grateful for the warmth. The monitoring screens showed grainy black and white feeds from cameras positioned around the station, though several screens displayed only static. I noticed that none of the working cameras covered Platform 3. Midnight arrived with a distant church bell tolling somewhere in the city. I grabbed my flashlight and the patrol log, ready to start my first official round. The protocol was simple. Walk through platforms 1 and 2, check that all doors were locked, verify no unauthorized persons were present, and note any maintenance issues. Initial sweep completed without incident, I wrote in the log, my handwriting looking stark and official against the yellowed pages. The second hour passed similarly, then the third. By 2 a.m., I was beginning to relax, letting the monotony of the routine lull me into a false sense of security. That was when I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound like footsteps on concrete coming from somewhere deeper in the station. I paused mid-step in the main hall, my flashlight beam frozen on a faded advertising poster for a train service that had been discontinued 30 years ago. The footsteps stopped when I stopped, started when I started walking again. Just the building settling, I told myself, echoing Jerome's words. Old places made noise, the heating system kicking on, pipes expanding and contracting, the natural creaks and groans of aged infrastructure. Perfectly normal, perfectly explainable. I continued my patrol, but now I was listening intently, trying to distinguish between ordinary sounds and anything that might be extraordinary. At 2:47 a.m., I noticed the time on the office computer and felt a strange chill. 3:47, the time on the broken clock on Platform 3. Something about that connection bothered me, though I couldn't articulate why. I shook it off and headed out for another round. This time, as I passed the entrance to Platform 3, I felt it, a gust of wind that had no business existing in an enclosed station. It carried that same metallic scent, stronger now, mixed with something else. Old fabric, maybe, or coal dust. The kind of smell you'd associate with trains from another era. Against my better judgment, I turned my flashlight toward the darkened walkway. For just a moment, I thought I saw something. A shape, roughly person-sized, standing at the far end of Platform 3, where the shadows were deepest. My heart rate kicked up, adrenaline flooding my system with that primal fight-or-flight cocktail. I blinked, and the shape was gone. Just an illusion created by my flashlight beam hitting the contours of the abandoned platform at an odd angle. Had to be. But as I turned away, I heard something that froze my blood in the veins. The soft, clear sound of a whistle being blown. The kind conductors once used to signal departures. It came from Platform 3, echoing through the empty station with an otherworldly clarity. The sound seemed to hang in the air long after it should have faded, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. I stood there for a full minute, maybe longer, debating whether to investigate. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was explainable. Maybe there was a homeless person taking shelter on the abandoned platform. Maybe some kids had broken in to explore the old station. Maybe I should call the police. But another part of me, the part that had felt that unnatural wind and smelled that impossible scent, was absolutely certain that I didn't want to know what was on Platform 3. I compromised by updating the patrol log. Unusual sounds reported from Platform 3, 2:51 a.m. Possible intruder will monitor. The words looked inadequate on the page, failing to capture the genuine dread that had settled into my bones. I decided to watch the static-filled camera feeds more carefully, even though I knew none of them covered that particular platform. The next 2 hours were exercises in escalating tension. Every sound became amplified, every shadow suspicious. I found myself checking over my shoulder constantly, that primitive sense of being watched growing stronger with each passing minute. During my 4 a.m. patrol, I deliberately avoided even glancing toward Platform 3, keeping my eyes fixed forward as I passed its entrance. But avoidance didn't help. I could feel it now, an attention pressing against my back, patient and persistent. At 4:47 a.m., 1 hour past the time frozen on that platform's broken clock, every light in the main hall flickered simultaneously. The fluorescent tubes buzzed angrily, and for 3 long seconds, I stood in complete darkness broken only by my flashlight beam. When the lights surged back to life, I saw something that made my breath catch. On the floor near the entrance to Platform 3, there was a wet footprint. Not wet like water, more like oil or some dark liquid that gleamed under the harsh lights. A single footprint pointing toward the main office, pointing toward me. I didn't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was in the office with the door locked, my back pressed against the wall, watching those monitors as if they could protect me from whatever was happening. The footprint was visible on one of the working cameras, just barely in frame. As I watched, it began to fade, the dark liquid seeming to evaporate or absorb into the concrete until no trace remained. The rational explanations I had been clinging to all night shattered like thin ice. This wasn't settling building sounds, or my imagination, or vagrant intruders. Something was wrong with the station. Something fundamentally and terrifyingly wrong, and it was centered on Platform 3. I thought about calling Jerome, demanding answers, but what would I even say? That I'd seen a shadow and heard a whistle and found a disappearing footprint? He'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I made it through the rest of my shift by staying in the office, violating the patrol schedule, but preserving what remained of my sanity. When Jerome arrived at 6:45 a.m., I was exhausted, wired on bad coffee and adrenaline, my nerves scraped raw. He took one look at me and sighed, a sound heavy with resignation and something that might have been sympathy. "First night's always the hardest," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You'll get used to it." But the way he said it suggested that getting used to it might not be something I wanted to do. As I drove home through the early morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that my first night at Riverside Junction had been some kind of test. And I wasn't entirely sure I'd passed. The second night, I came prepared. I'd spent the day trying to research Riverside Junction online, but information was surprisingly sparse. The station had opened in 1952, served commuter and freight traffic until the late 80s, and had been operating at minimal capacity ever since. No mention of accidents, deaths, or anything that might explain the suffocating dread I'd felt around Platform 3. I told myself that knowledge would be armor against fear, but mostly I just felt more isolated, like I was the only person who'd noticed something wrong. I arrived 30 minutes early, catching Jerome before he left. He was in the main office, filling out paperwork with the slow deliberation of someone who'd done the same task thousands of times. "Jerome," I started, trying to keep my voice casual, "what's the actual story with Platform 3? Why is it really closed?" His pen stopped moving. For a long moment, he didn't look up from the forms. Budget cuts. Renovations that never happened. I already told you. Yeah, but has anything ever happened there? Any incidents, accidents, anything like that? Now he did look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that confirmed my worst suspicions. He knew. Whatever was happening at this station, Jerome knew about it. Daniel, the best advice I can give you is to do your job and don't ask questions that'll keep you up during the day. Some things are better left alone. That's not really an answer. No, he agreed, standing and gathering his belongings with sudden urgency, but it's the only one you're getting from me. Just follow your route, keep to the schedule, and you'll be fine. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame just like the first night. And Daniel, if you see something on platform 3, just keep walking. Don't engage, don't investigate, don't even look too long. Understand? Before I could press him further, he was gone, leaving me with confirmation that I wasn't imagining things and absolutely no useful information about what I was dealing with. The advice to just keep walking lodged in my brain like a splinter. It wasn't enough to just avoid platform 3. I needed to actively not see whatever was there. The shift started quietly, almost mockingly normal. I did my rounds exactly as prescribed, noting nothing unusual in my logs. But I was hyper-aware now, attuned to every detail. At 11:47 p.m., I passed the entrance to platform 3 and kept my eyes fixed firmly forward, fighting the urge to look. I felt it again, that pressure of attention, but I didn't turn. Small victory. At 1:15 a.m. during my third patrol, I heard the whistle again. This time it was closer, louder, more insistent. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and empty walls until I couldn't pinpoint its source. My hands shook as I gripped my flashlight, willing myself to keep moving, to not investigate. The whistle blew 3 times in quick succession, each blast more urgent than the last, like someone desperately trying to get my attention. I kept walking. At 2:47 a.m., that cursed hour again, I was in the main office when I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, measured, deliberate. The sound of leather shoes on concrete, the kind of formal footwear that hadn't been standard for decades. I watched the monitors, my heart hammering, but saw nothing on the functioning cameras. The footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the office door. I held my breath, staring at the frosted glass panel that prevented me from seeing what was on the other side. A shadow appeared, person-shaped, standing perfectly still. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Then slowly, deliberately, whatever was outside turned and walked away, those measured footsteps receding back towards platform 3. I didn't breathe properly until the sound had completely faded. The third night, the phenomenon escalated. I saw it clearly this time, no shadows or tricks of light to provide plausible deniability. During my 1 a.m. patrol, as I passed the entrance to platform 3, a figure stood at the edge of visibility. He wore a conductor's uniform from the 1950s, complete with brass buttons that caught the dim light, a peaked cap, and a whistle on a chain around his neck. His face was pale, features blurred as if seen through old film, but his eyes were sharp and focused entirely on me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Jerome's words echoed in my head, "Don't engage, don't look too long." I forced myself to maintain my pace, to keep my eyes forward even though every cell in my body wanted to turn and confront what I was seeing in my peripheral vision. The conductor didn't move closer, didn't speak, just stood there watching as I passed. I felt his gaze follow me like a physical touch, cold and assessing. That night, I found something new in the main office. An old filing cabinet I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a broken vending machine. Inside, buried under years of outdated schedules and forgotten paperwork, I discovered a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting cramped and urgent. It belonged to someone named Richard Caldwell, a night attendant from 1987. The entries started mundane enough, typical complaints about the solitude and boredom of overnight work. But as I flipped through the pages, Richard's tone changed, growing increasingly paranoid and frightened. He wrote about hearing whistles, seeing a figure in an old conductor's uniform, feeling watched. The parallels to my own experience were uncanny and deeply unsettling. One entry, dated October 23, 1987, made my blood run cold. I made a terrible mistake tonight. The conductor on Platform 3 has been appearing more frequently, getting closer each night. Tonight, when he appeared at the usual spot, I was so tired, so worn down by this constant tension that I forgot myself. I waved at him. Just a simple automatic gesture of acknowledgement, the kind you'd give to any coworker. The moment my hand moved, I knew I'd done something irreversible. His expression changed. He smiled, but it was wrong, all wrong. Then he took a step toward me. Just one step, but I could feel the intention behind it. He's not going to stop appearing. He's going to keep getting closer. I don't know what happens if he reaches me, but I know with absolute certainty that I don't want to find out. The journal ended abruptly after that entry. No explanation, no resolution. I searched the cabinet for more information and found a personnel file for Richard Caldwell. According to the official records, he'd stopped showing up for work on October 25, 1987. No notice given, no forwarding address, just vanished. The file was marked abandoned position and tucked away with dozens of others. I spent the rest of that night reading through more files, my hands trembling as a pattern emerged. Riverside Junction had a history of night attendants who simply disappeared or quit abruptly, going back decades. Not all of them, but enough to form a disturbing trend. Some left notes, others just failed to show up for shifts. The ones who left notes mentioned Platform 3, mentioned the conductor, mentioned a terrible compulsion to acknowledge him. One note, written on the back of a patrol log from 1973, stated simply, "If you're reading this, you've seen him too. Whatever you do, don't let him know you see him. Pretend he's not there. The moment you acknowledge his existence, you give him permission to make you part of this place. I'm getting out while I still can." The fourth night, armed with this terrible knowledge, I understood what I was facing. The phantom conductor wasn't just a ghost or a hallucination. He was something worse, a trap, a test, an entity that fed on acknowledgement. Seeing him wasn't the danger. The danger was letting him know you'd seen him, breaking that invisible barrier between observer and observed. As long as I maintained the pretense that he didn't exist, I was safe. But the moment I acknowledged him, through a wave, a word, even prolonged eye contact, something fundamental would change. He was testing me, I realized. Each night, he appeared closer, stayed longer, made himself more obvious. At 12:30 a.m., he stood at the far end of Platform 3, visible when I passed. At 2:25 a.m., he was at the middle of the platform, closer to the entrance. At 3:47 a.m., that cursed hour, he stood just inside the darkened walkway, barely 15 feet from where I had to pass. I kept my eyes forward, my face neutral, my body language indicating complete unawareness of his presence. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed. He was so close, I could hear the fabric of his uniform rustling, could smell that metallic scent of old trains and older death. My peripheral vision caught details I didn't want to see, the unnatural stillness of his form, the way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath, the slight transparency that proved he wasn't entirely solid. But I didn't look, didn't acknowledge, didn't give him what he wanted. The fifth night, he tried harder. At midnight, he appeared in the main hall, standing between me and the entrance to Platform 1. I had to walk past him, had to navigate around his presence without appearing to notice it. I adjusted my path slightly, as if detouring around an obstacle I couldn't quite see, and kept walking. His head turned to follow my movement, and I heard a sound that might have been frustration or might have been hunger. At 1:30 a.m., he was in the office doorway when I returned from patrol. I had to brush past him to enter, feeling the cold radiating from his form, the wrongness of his presence making my skin crawl. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle, passing within inches of his transparent form. Every instinct screamed at me to recoil, to acknowledge the impossibility of what I was experiencing, but I didn't. I entered the office as if nothing was there, sat at my desk, and began filling out my patrol log with trembling hands. He stood in the doorway for 20 minutes, watching me. I could feel his gaze like ice water trickling down my spine, but I kept my eyes on my paperwork, my breathing measured, my facade of ignorance intact. Finally, mercifully, he turned and walked back toward Platform 3, those measured footsteps receding into the distance. I was learning the rules of this terrible game, understanding the boundaries that kept me safe. Don't acknowledge, don't engage, maintain the illusion that he doesn't exist, even when he's so close you can see the tarnish on his brass buttons, even when his presence fills every corner of your awareness. The moment you break that illusion, the moment you let him know you see him, the rules change. And based on Richard Caldwell's journal and the files of missing attendants, the new rules weren't survivable. But knowing the rules didn't make following them easier. Each night, the psychological toll grew heavier. The constant vigilance, the deliberate denial of my own senses, the exhausting effort of pretending not to see something that was undeniably there. It was wearing me down. I started having nightmares during the day, jolting awake with the phantom sensation of cold breath on my neck. I lost weight, developed a persistent tremor in my hands, jumped at every unexpected sound. And each night, the conductor of Platform 3 grew bolder, testing the limits of my endurance, waiting for the moment when exhaustion or fear would make me slip, waiting to acknowledge him, waiting to claim another victim for the haunted rails of Riverside Junction. By the end of my second week, I'd become obsessed with understanding what I was dealing with. Sleep was impossible during the day, my mind racing with questions that had no rational answers. I spent hours in the local library, combing through old newspapers on microfiche, searching for any incident connected to Riverside Junction. The librarian, a kind woman named Patricia, noticed my growing desperation and asked if I needed help. "I'm researching the history of the Riverside Junction station," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Specifically, anything unusual that might have happened there." Her expression shifted, recognition and something like pity crossing her features. "You're working the night shift there, aren't you?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you know?" "You're not the first person to come here looking for answers about that place." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a box of materials that weren't in the regular catalog. "These are local history items that people have donated over the years. Some of them mention the station. I'm not supposed to let them leave the library, but you can review them here." The box contained a treasure trove of information, personal journals, newspaper clippings, even a few photographs. I spread the materials across a table and began piecing together the station's dark history. What I discovered made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In March of 1952, just 3 months after Riverside Junction opened, a conductor named Thomas Whitmore died on Platform 3. According to the newspaper account, it was ruled an accident. Whitmore had been checking the platform late one night when he somehow fell onto the tracks just as a freight train was coming through. The article was brief, clinical, noting that the body had been significantly damaged and that Whitmore left behind a wife and young daughter. But a personal letter tucked into the same folder told a different story. It was from Whitmore's widow to the station manager, written 6 months after the accident. Her handwriting was shaky, the words almost incoherent with grief and fury. She claimed that her husband's death was no accident, that he'd been reporting strange occurrences on Platform 3 for weeks before he died. The night he died, he'd told his wife he was going to confront whatever was haunting the platform. He never came home. The letter demanded an investigation, but according to a terse response from the station manager, the matter was considered closed. Thomas Whitmore was an accident. Period. His widow's claims of supernatural activity were dismissed as the ravings of a grief-stricken woman. But the incidents didn't stop with Whitmore's death. In 1956, a night janitor named Paul Hendricks quit suddenly, leaving a rambling note about a conductor who wouldn't leave him alone. In 1963, an attendant named Dorothy Hayes requested a transfer to day shift, citing psychological distress caused by unexplained phenomena. In 1971, a security guard named Michael Torres simply stopped showing up for work. His apartment was found empty, all his belongings left behind, no forwarding address or explanation. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Every few years, someone working the night shift at Riverside Junction would encounter the phantom conductor. Some quit, some vanished, and some, like Richard Caldwell, left behind warnings for whoever came next. The station had been collecting victims for over 70 years, and the management either didn't know or didn't care. I found something else in that box, something that changed everything. It was a faded photograph from 1952, taken at the station's grand opening. Workers and officials stood in a line, smiling for the camera. Among them, I recognized Thomas Whitmore from a death notice photo. But there was someone else in the picture, standing slightly apart from the group, his image slightly blurred as if he'd moved at the wrong moment. He wore a conductor's uniform identical to the one I'd been seeing night after night. The caption listed names, but this mysterious figure wasn't included. I showed it to Patricia. "Do you know who this is?" I asked, pointing to the mysterious figure. She studied the image, frowning. "That's strange. I've seen this photograph before, but I don't remember that person being in it." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "I cataloged this collection last year. I'm certain this photo only showed the official opening ceremony participants. But now there's this extra person." She looked at me, concern evident in her eyes. "Daniel, are you okay? You look pale." I wasn't okay. The phantom conductor wasn't just haunting Platform 3. He was somehow changing reality itself, inserting himself into historical records, making himself more real. Or perhaps he'd always been there, and I was only now able to see him because I'd become part of his game. Either possibility was equally terrifying. That night, I arrived at work with a new understanding and a deepening dread. The conductor wasn't just a ghost trapped by trauma. He was something else. Something that wanted to expand its existence to become more substantial by claiming new victims. Each person who acknowledged him gave him more power, more reality, more presence in the world. That was why the rule was so absolute. Acknowledging him wasn't just dangerous for me, it was feeding something that shouldn't exist. Jerome was waiting in the office when I arrived, which was unusual. He typically left before I clocked in, maintaining minimal overlap. Tonight, he sat at the desk, a bottle of whiskey open beside him, despite company policy. He looked old, tired, carrying the weight of too many secrets. "You went to the library," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because I did the same thing 23 years ago when I first started here. Found the same files, learned the same history, realized the same terrible truth." He poured himself a drink, then offered me one. I shook my head. "You want to know why I've stayed here all these years, knowing what haunts this place?" "Yes." "Because someone has to. If this station closes, if they tear it down or abandon it completely, what happens to him?" Jerome gestured vaguely toward Platform 3. "Does he dissipate, or does he find somewhere else to haunt, somewhere with more people, more potential victims? At least here he's contained. At least here there are rules." "The rule," I said, "never acknowledge him. But why? What happens if you do?" Jerome took a long drink before answering. "I've only seen it happen once, about 15 years ago. New guy, didn't last 2 weeks. The conductor appeared to him on the 5th night, close enough to touch, and the kid panicked, started shouting at it, telling it to leave him alone, demanding to know what it wanted. The moment those words left his mouth, everything changed. The conductor smiled, this horrible, hungry smile, and reached out, touched his shoulder. Just a simple touch, but the kid started screaming. Not like he was in pain, more like he was seeing something that shattered his sanity." "What happened to him?" "Found him the next morning on Platform 3, catatonic, eyes open but nobody home. They took him to the hospital, but he never recovered. He's in a long-term care facility now, has been for 15 years, just staring at nothing. And sometimes the nurses say he whispers the same thing over and over. 'He won't let me leave. I'm part of the station now.'" The implication hit me like a physical blow. The phantom conductor didn't just want acknowledgement. He wanted to claim people, to trap them in whatever twilight existence he inhabited. The missing attendants, the ones who simply vanished without a trace, maybe they hadn't really left. Maybe they were still here, stuck in some horrible in-between state, forever part of Riverside Junction. "Why doesn't the company shut this place down?" I demanded. "Why keep operating if people are getting hurt?" Jerome laughed, a bitter sound. "You think the company knows? The turnover gets reported as standard personnel issues, quits, no-shows, medical leaves. Nobody connects the dots because nobody wants to. And the few who do figure it out either leave quietly or end up like you and me, staying because we're too afraid of what might happen if we don't." "That's insane. We should go public, tell people what's happening here."
"And say what? That a ghost haunts Platform 3? That you have to pretend not to see it or it'll steal your soul?" They'd think we were crazy. Hell, on my days off, even I think we're crazy. But then I come back here, and I see him, and I know it's real. Jerome stood, gathering his things. "My advice? Quit. Tonight. Walk away and don't look back. Find another job, any other job. This isn't worth your sanity." But if I quit, someone else will take the position. Someone who doesn't know the rules. That's not your responsibility, Daniel. Isn't it? If I walk away knowing what I know and someone gets hurt because I didn't warn them, how is that different from the company's willful ignorance? Jerome studied me for a long moment, something like respect crossing his weathered features. You're a better person than me. I've been telling myself it's not my problem for over 2 decades. He paused at the door, that familiar gesture. There's a box in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Old documents, logs from previous attendants who figured out the rules. Read them. Maybe they'll help you survive this. And Daniel, he's getting more aggressive. I've noticed it the past few weeks. Whatever is feeding him, he's getting stronger. Be careful. After Jerome left, I found the box he'd mentioned. It contained dozens of documents, a secret archive maintained by night attendants across the decades. Each one described their experiences with the phantom conductor, their strategies for avoiding acknowledgement, their theories about what he was and what he wanted. Reading them was like hearing voices from beyond, warnings from people who'd fought the same battle I was fighting. One log from 1979 described the conductor's behavioral patterns. He appears most frequently during the hours between midnight and 4 a.m., with peak activity at 2:47 and 3:47. He seems drawn to fear and attention. The more afraid you are, the more substantial he becomes. Calm indifference is the best defense. Treat him like he's not there, because in the reality you want to live in, he isn't. Another from 1991 offered practical advice. Use reflective surfaces to track his movements without direct observation. The windows on Platform 1 provide a good vantage point for monitoring Platform 3. If he gets close, don't freeze, don't run. Just maintain your routine as if nothing is wrong. He feeds on disruption, on the break in normalcy. But the most chilling entry came from an undated log, the handwriting shaky and desperate. I think I understand now. He's not haunting the station because he died here. He is the station, or rather, he's becoming it. Every person who acknowledges him, every victim he claims, makes him more permanent, more real. He started as a ghost, but he's evolving into something worse, something that's trying to cross over into our world completely. Platform 3 is his anchor, his gateway. If he ever becomes fully real again, I don't know what will happen, but I know it will be catastrophic. The only thing keeping him trapped is our refusal to see him. Our collective denial is the cage that holds him. The day someone acknowledges him and survives, the day he gets what he wants without claiming a victim, that's the day he'll be free. I sat in the silent office, surrounded by the desperate warnings of the damned, understanding the true weight of what I faced. This wasn't just about surviving my shift. It was about maintaining a barrier between worlds, about keeping something inhuman and hungry trapped in the shadows where it belonged. Every night I worked here, I was playing a game with impossibly high stakes, where one moment of weakness could have consequences beyond my own fate. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11 p.m., and somewhere in the station, I heard the distant sound of a whistle. The conductor of Platform 3 knew I'd uncovered his history, understood his nature, and he was ready to test whether that knowledge would make me stronger or more vulnerable. I was about to find out. Armed with the knowledge from decades of warnings, I developed a system for surviving my shifts at Riverside Junction. It was a delicate, exhausting dance of avoidance and denial that required constant vigilance and absolute discipline. Every night became a psychological battlefield where the stakes were my sanity and possibly my soul. The first rule of my system was routine. The conductor seemed to feed on disruption, on moments when fear or surprise broke my composure, so I made my patrols mechanical,
timed to the second, following the exact same path every hour regardless of what I saw or heard. At 12 a.m., I would leave the office, walk through the main hall, check Platform 1, then Platform 2, verify the locked doors, and return. The entire circuit took exactly 14 minutes. I did this 8 times per shift, plus shorter checks of the main hall every 30 minutes. The predictability was armor against fear. When the conductor appeared in my path, which he increasingly did, I would simply adjust my route with the minimal deviation necessary, as if navigating around a piece of furniture I'd encountered 1,000 times before. No hesitation, no acknowledgement, just a slight shift in trajectory that suggested complete unawareness of his presence. The second rule was sensory management. I learned to control where I looked and how I listened. Peripheral vision became my enemy because that's where I'd catch the most disturbing details, the way his uniform moved even though there was no wind, the impossible angle of his joints, the fact that his shadow fell in the wrong direction. So I trained my eyes to focus on neutral points, the exit signs above doors, the safety lines on platforms, the clock in the main hall. Anything but him. Sound was trickier. The whistle blasts, the footsteps, the occasional sound of his voice calling names that weren't mine but might have belonged to previous victims, these I couldn't avoid hearing, but I could refuse to react. I developed a mental technique of categorizing unwanted sounds as station noise, filing them away in the same mental space as the hum of fluorescent lights or the rumble of distant traffic. Background noise to be noted but not responded to. The third rule was emotional control. The conductor seemed to sense fear, to become more aggressive when I was anxious or uncertain, so I practiced a kind of militant calmness, controlling my breathing, maintaining a neutral expression, forcing my body language to project confidence and disinterest. Some nights this was easier than others. Some nights I felt like I was barely holding myself together, like my composure was a thin shell about to crack at any moment. But the system worked, mostly. I made it through my third week, then my fourth. The conductor tested me constantly, appearing in increasingly bold ways. He stood in the middle of hallways, forcing me to walk through his translucent form, the cold making my breath fog even though it was October and the station was heated. He appeared suddenly around corners, trying to startle me into making eye contact. Once, I found him standing directly in front of a door I needed to check, positioned so I'd have to acknowledge his presence to complete my patrol. I walked forward without breaking stride and passed through him. The sensation was indescribable, like diving into ice water that was also somehow airless and thick. Every nerve in my body screamed wrongness, but I kept walking, kept breathing, kept my face neutral. On the other side, I unlocked the door, verified it was secure, and continued my route as if nothing had happened. Behind me, I heard a sound that might have been frustration or might have been rage. The fourth week brought a new escalation. The conductor began to speak. Not random sounds or ambient noise, but clear, deliberate words aimed at getting my attention. Sometimes it was simple greetings, "Good evening." Sometimes questions, "Can you help me?" Sometimes commands, "Look at me." His voice had a strange quality, like it was coming from very far away and simultaneously from inside my own head. Ignoring speech was harder than ignoring visual or ambient sounds. Every social instinct, every polite impulse urged me to respond when spoken to, but I gritted my teeth and maintained silence. I was alone in the station, I told myself. Whatever I heard was just the building settling, just my imagination, just anything but anything requiring a response. On the 28th night, he tried a new tactic. At 2:47 a.m., during my patrol of Platform 2, I heard a woman screaming from Platform 3. The sound was terrified, desperate, the cry of someone in mortal danger. Every emergency response instinct I possessed screamed at me to help, to investigate, to do something. My feet actually stopped moving, my body preparing to sprint toward the sound. Then I remembered Richard Caldwell's journal, one passage I'd read a dozen times. He can mimic sounds, voices, even create the illusion of people in distress. It's a lure, a trap designed to make you acknowledge his domain. The screams aren't real. There's no one to save. There's only him, waiting for you to cross the threshold. I forced myself to continue my patrol route. The screaming grew louder, more desperate, mixed with pounding sounds like someone beating on a door. I walked past the entrance to Platform 3, kept my eyes forward, completed my circuit. The screaming followed me all the way back to the office, finally cutting off abruptly when I closed the door. I sat at the desk, my hands shaking, sweat soaking through my uniform despite the cold, wondering how much more of this I could endure. The answer came the following week. I made a mistake, not a complete violation of the rules, but close enough to terrify me. It was my 33rd night, and I was exhausted beyond reason. I'd been having nightmares every day, jolting awake after just 2 or 3 hours of sleep. My hands had developed a persistent tremor, and I'd lost 15 pounds. The constant vigilance, the perpetual state of heightened awareness was destroying me physically and mentally. At 3:47 a.m., that cursed hour, I was walking through the main hall when the conductor appeared directly in front of me. Not to the side, not in the distance, but immediately in my path, close enough that collision was unavoidable. In my exhausted state, my reflexes took over. My eyes flickered up, making direct eye contact for maybe half a second before I caught myself and looked away. That half second was nearly my undoing. In that brief moment, I saw him fully, not as a peripheral shadow or translucent figure, but as he truly was. His eyes were empty voids that seemed to contain infinite depth, infinite hunger. His smile was inhuman, too wide, filled with too many teeth that were too sharp. And in that instant of eye contact, I felt him see me, really see me, recognize me not as an obstacle to navigate around, but as a specific person, a potential victim with a name and a life he wanted to claim. The connection snapped when I broke eye contact, but the damage was done. I'd acknowledged him, not fully, not completely, but enough. He knew now that I saw him, that I was aware of his presence. The game had changed. I rushed back to the office, locked the door, and spent the remaining hours of my shift in a state of paralyzing terror, listening to him move around the station with a new purpose, a new determination. He appeared at the office window, his face pressed against the glass, those void eyes staring at me with patient malevolence. He knocked, soft, rhythmic taps that matched my heartbeat. He spoke my name, my actual name, which I'd never spoken aloud in the station. Daniel, Daniel, I know you can hear me, Daniel. Why won't you talk to me? I just want to help you. I just want to be acknowledged. The word acknowledged sent chills through me because it confirmed everything I'd read, everything I'd feared. He didn't want conversation or help or anything benign. He wanted acknowledgement, validation of his existence, permission to cross some invisible boundary that my denial had been maintaining, and I'd almost given it to him. Jerome found me in the morning, still locked in the office, pale and shaking. He took one look at me and knew. What happened? I made eye contact, just for a second, but he saw me. Jerome's expression darkened. How long? Half a second, maybe less. And you're still here? You didn't speak to him? Didn't respond? No, I broke contact immediately. Jerome exhaled slowly. Then you might be okay. Might be. But Daniel, you can't make that mistake again. Ever. The next time could be fatal. He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. I have something that might help. I should have given it to you sooner, but I hoped you'd quit before it got this bad. From his pocket, he pulled out a small object wrapped in faded cloth. This was given to me by the attendant who worked here before me. He got it from his predecessor, who got it from whoever came before him. Nobody knows how old it is or where it came from originally, but every night shift worker who's survived long term has carried it. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small iron railway spike, old and worn, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Keep this with you during your shifts. The old stories say iron repels supernatural entities, binds them, keeps them at bay. I don't know if that's true, but I know I feel safer carrying it. Maybe it's just psychological, but maybe it's something more. I took the spike, feeling its cool weight in my palm. The symbols carved into it were unfamiliar, not any language I recognized. Has it ever stopped him? Not stopped, no, but maybe slowed him down, made him less bold, or maybe I've gotten good at following the rules. Either way, you need every advantage you can get now. He's focused on you specifically. That eye contact created a connection. He's going to push harder, test you more aggressively. The next few nights will be crucial. If you can maintain your denial, refuse to acknowledge him despite the escalation, the connection might fade. But if you slip again, he didn't need to finish the sentence. That night, I returned to work carrying the iron spike in my pocket like a talisman. I didn't know if it would help, didn't know if anything could protect me from what I'd set in motion. The conductor was waiting for me. I could feel his presence the moment I entered the station, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. This was personal now. He'd seen me, recognized me, and he wanted to complete what my eye contact had started. The game of denial was about to reach its deadliest phase, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive it. But I had no choice except to try. For myself, for the next person who might take this job, for all the victims who'd come before me, I had to maintain the rules. I had to pretend he didn't exist, even as he did everything in his power to force me to acknowledge him. The battle for my soul was about to begin in earnest. The 34th night began with an oppressive silence that felt like a physical presence. When I entered Riverside Junction, the usual ambient sounds, the hum of electricity, the distant rumble of city traffic, the settling of old building, were completely absent. The station felt suspended, trapped in a moment between heartbeats, waiting for something to break the tension. The conductor was there immediately, not hidden in shadows or appearing gradually, but standing in the center of the main hall, as if he'd been waiting for my arrival. His form was more solid than I'd ever seen it, the details of his uniform crisp and clear, his face no longer blurred but sharply defined. He'd gained substance from our eye contact, I realized with horror. That brief connection had fed him, made him more real. I walked past him, eyes fixed on the office door, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The iron spike in my pocket felt heavy, significant, whether it was actually doing anything or merely providing psychological comfort, I couldn't say. The conductor turned as I passed, his movements smooth and deliberate, tracking me with those void eyes that seemed to consume light rather than reflect it. The night proceeded in escalating stages of terror. During my midnight patrol, he appeared at every turn, always in my path, forcing me to navigate around him or through him. Each time I passed through his translucent form, the cold was worse, more penetrating, leaving me shaking and gaseous breath. My fingers were numb despite my gloves, and frost was forming on my eyelashes. At 1:15 a.m., he began speaking continuously, a running monologue designed to wear down my resolve. "Daniel, I know you're tired. I know you're scared. This doesn't have to be so difficult. Just talk to me. Just acknowledge that I'm here. That's all I want. One word, one gesture, and this ends. We can help each other, Daniel. I'm so alone here, trapped for so long. You understand loneliness, don't you? After your divorce, after everyone left you, I can be your companion. I can make sure you're never alone again." The specificity of his words chilled me to my core. He knew about my divorce, about my isolation, details I'd never shared with anyone at the station. He was either reading my thoughts or had access to information he shouldn't possess. Either possibility was terrifying, but I clenched my jaw and maintained my silence, continued my patrol route as if I heard nothing but empty air. At 2 a.m., the station itself began to change. The lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost purposeful, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. The temperature dropped so severely that my breath became thick fog, and ice crystals started forming on the windows. The walls seemed to shift, the architecture becoming fluid and uncertain, like reality itself was becoming negotiable. Platform 3, I noticed during my 2:30 a.m. patrol, was glowing with a faint phosphorescent light that had no identifiable source. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat, and I could hear sounds from within. Phantom trains arriving and departing, crowds of people talking in voices from different eras, announcements and scratchy recordings that hadn't been used in decades. The platform was becoming more real, more substantial, as if the conductor's increased solidity was affecting his entire domain. At 2:47 a.m., the attacks became physical. As I walked through the main hall, objects began moving. A bench slid across the floor, positioning itself to block my path. The vending machine I passed daily rocked violently, then toppled forward, missing me by inches. A trash can flew through the air, striking the wall beside my head with enough force to dent the metal. Through it all, I maintained my route, stepping over obstacles, ducking projectiles, refusing to show fear or acknowledge the source of the assault. The conductor appeared in front of me, so close I could see every detail of his impossible face. "Why won't you look at me?" he screamed, his voice no longer calm or persuasive, but filled with rage and desperation. "I know you see me. You've seen me every night for weeks. Just admit it. Just say my name."
But I didn't know his name. Thomas Whitmore had died on Platform 3, but the phantom conductor existed before that death, had been waiting there when the station opened, had perhaps always been there in some form. He was older than any individual tragedy, a thing that wore the appearance of a conductor, but was really something else. Something that had learned to mimic human form to attract human attention. At 3:30 a.m., I made a discovery that changed everything. During my patrol of Platform 2, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small brass plaque mounted on the wall, so tarnished and old it had become invisible against the aged metal. I paused, not breaking my route but allowing my eyes to focus on it for the first time. The engraving was barely legible, but I could make out a few words. "In memory of the workers lost during construction, may they find the peace denied them in life." Lost workers. Not one conductor, but multiple deaths during the station's construction.
The phantom I'd been seeing wasn't a single ghost, but an amalgamation, a collective entity formed from tragedy and fed by decades of fear and acknowledgement. Every victim it claimed added to its substance. Every person who acknowledged it gave it more power to claim the next. It was a predator that had learned to hunt using the appearance of what people expected to see, a lone conductor lost and seeking help, when really it was a trap waiting to close. This revelation should have terrified me more, but instead it gave me clarity. This thing didn't want connection or help or acknowledgement for any benign reason. It wanted to consume, to expand, to add me to its collective existence. And the only defense was absolute denial, maintaining the barrier between its reality and mine through sheer force of will. At 3:47 a.m., the conductor made his final desperate play. The temperature in the station plummeted to levels that shouldn't have been survivable. My breath came out as solid ice crystals, and my exposed skin burned with cold. The lights went out completely, plunging the station into absolute darkness, except for that phosphorescent glow from Platform 3, which had grown so bright it illuminated the entire main hall in sickly green light. In that light, I saw them. Not just the conductor, but dozens of figures standing throughout the station. Some wore modern clothes, others uniforms from various eras, construction workers, attendants, passengers, all translucent and glowing with that same wrong light. The victims. The ones who'd acknowledged the conductor and been claimed, now part of his collective existence, used as lures to attract new prey. They all turned to face me simultaneously, and as one, they spoke my name. Daniel. The sound was overwhelming, dozens of voices in perfect harmony, each one desperate and hungry. Daniel, help us, save us, acknowledge us, join us. The figures began moving toward me from all directions, converging slowly but inevitably. If they touched me, if they surrounded me completely, I knew instinctively that my denial wouldn't be enough. The combined weight of all that desperate, hungry attention would shatter my defenses, force an acknowledgement from me through sheer, overwhelming presence. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Not to escape the station, that would have been abandoning my post, breaking the routine that had been my protection. Instead, I ran my patrol route. In the darkness, by memory and instinct, I navigated the path I'd walked dozens of times, maintaining my schedule even as phantom hands grasped at me from the shadows. I felt them brush against my uniform, cold and insubstantial, trying a solid grip, but unable to fully manifest in the face of my continued denial. At 4 a.m., I completed my patrol and returned to the office. The door slammed shut behind me, and I locked it with shaking hands, the iron spike clutched so tightly in my other fist that its edges drew blood from my palm. The office provided no real protection, I'd learned that weeks ago, but it gave me a boundary, a defined space to defend. The conductor appeared at the window, but he wasn't alone anymore. The entire station seemed pressed against the glass, dozens of faces staring in at me with those void eyes, hands leaving frost prints as they pressed against the barrier. The conductor's face was in the center, and for the first time I saw genuine emotion there. Not anger or hunger, but something like fear. He was desperate now, throwing everything at me in a final attempt to break my will before dawn came and weakened his power.
"You can't hold out forever, Daniel," he said, his voice coming from everywhere at once. "Eventually, you'll make a mistake. Eventually, exhaustion or fear or simple human instinct will make you acknowledge us.
And when that happens, you'll understand. You'll see what we really are, what we're trying to become. This station is a doorway, Daniel. We're trying to cross over, to become fully real again. You're standing in the way of our resurrection." I understood then with perfect clarity. This wasn't about claiming individual victims anymore. The conductor and his collected souls were trying to push through the barrier between death and life, using acknowledgement as a key to unlock the door. Every person who saw them and admitted they existed strengthened that bridge. If they ever collected enough acknowledgments, enough people joined their ranks, they might succeed in crossing over completely. And if that happened, if this station became a genuine doorway for the dead to return, the consequences would extend far beyond my personal survival. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed me, but instead it gave me strength. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about keeping that door closed, maintaining the wall between worlds, protecting not just myself, but everyone who might encounter these things if they broke through. I sat at the desk, eyes closed, and began to meditate. It was a technique I'd learned years ago during my marriage, a way to manage stress and anxiety. I focused on my breathing, on the rhythm of my heartbeat, on the solid reality of the office around me. I built a mental fortress of denial, not just refusing to see the phantoms, but actively rejecting their existence in my personal reality. They weren't there. The station was empty. I was alone. These truths I repeated like a mantra, making them more real than what my eyes and ears reported. The assault on the office intensified. The glass cracked but didn't break. The door rattled in its frame but held. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed on every surface, but I kept breathing, kept existing in my defined reality where none of this was happening. At 5:30 a.m., I felt the change. The pressure against the office began to ease, the desperate attacks losing their strength. At 6 a.m., the first pre-dawn light filtered through the ice-covered windows, and the phantoms began to fade, their forms becoming translucent again, less substantial. The conductor's face, pressed against the glass, showed something like despair as the light grew stronger. "Tomorrow night," he promised, his voice barely a whisper now. "Tomorrow night, Daniel. We'll be waiting." Then they were gone, retreating into whatever dimension they inhabited during daylight hours, leaving behind only frost patterns on the windows and the lingering scent of old metal and older death. Jerome found me at 6:45 a.m., still sitting at the desk, covered in frost, my hand bleeding from where I'd clutched the iron spike. He didn't say anything at first, just brought me hot coffee and a first aid kit, understanding that I needed time to resurface from wherever I'd retreated to survive the night. Finally, he asked, "Did you make it without acknowledging?" "Yes, barely, but yes." "Then you survived. That's what matters." But I knew it wasn't over. The conductor had promised he'd be waiting, and his final attack revealed the true stakes of this battle. I couldn't quit now, couldn't abandon this position knowing what I knew. Someone had to hold the line, had to maintain that denial that kept those things trapped in their half-existence. As I drove home through the early morning light, exhausted and traumatized but still intact, I understood that I'd made a choice. I would keep working the night shift at Riverside Junction. Not because I wanted to, not because the pay was good, but because someone needed to maintain that wall between worlds. Someone needed to follow the unspoken rules and keep the phantoms of Platform 3 trapped in their half-existence. The conductor was waiting for me to fail, waiting for the night when exhaustion or fear would make me acknowledge his existence fully and completely. And when that night came, if it came, I would either find the strength to resist one more time, or I would join the collected souls pressing against reality's barriers, desperate to cross over into the light. For now, I was still myself, still alive, still fighting. And as long as I could maintain that denial, as long as I could pretend the conductor didn't exist, even as he stood before me, I kept not just myself safe, but everyone who might follow. The rules were simple. Never acknowledge, never engage, never admit that the impossible was real. Follow those rules, and you might survive. Break them, and you become another face in the phantom crowd, another voice calling desperately from the darkness, another permanent fixture of the haunted rails. I'd learned the truth that night. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to see what's right in front of you. Sometimes survival depends on the strength of your denial. And sometimes the most important battle is the one fought not with weapons or words, but with the simple, stubborn insistence that the monsters aren't real.